listening to Living with ADHD and CPTSD, available on Apple and wherever you get your podcasts. Hello everyone and welcome to another episode of Living with ADHD and CPTSD. Today's episode is CPTSD related, and on my show I have a guest. Her name is Annette, and she is an advocate, writer, and domestic abuse survivor. And together we are going to discuss multi-generations when it comes, or abuse and trauma, and the differences and the level of awareness that is the evidence of change, and how much awareness there is when each generation grows up, and whether or not it stays with them and it just keeps going down the line, or if it stops. And obviously that is up to the person who is in charge or is the adult. It's up to them to decide if the abuse will continue or if they will get help and start healing and avoid passing it down through their family. So, all right. So, Annette, thank you for joining me. I'm glad that you're on the show. It's happy to have you here.
Thank you so much. I was really happy to get your invite. It meant a lot to me personally.
Excellent.
It's a topic that I'm definitely deeply passionate about. A lot of my time is spent educating others and bringing awareness to others by sharing my own story, by educating about the various types of abuse and what that might look like. What is involved in trauma, because it's very complex. And
absolutely.
For me myself, I didn't even really start wondering, until I became a parent myself, right, and had myself. It wasn't until then that I started dealing with some of the certain triggers in certain situations, with raising my kids and parenting and everything. And, there were very, very amazing things about my upbringing, but there were some really hard times as well. And, as a young parent myself, I started thinking about, what are the ways of parenting that didn't work for me, what maybe would have worked for me, and, just tried to parent my children that way. But I didn't realize at the time that I didn't even really have an awareness or understanding that I was already carrying trauma in me and with me. I didn't realize that there were a lot of experiences that I went through as a small child or as a teenager even that affected me as deeply as they ended up doing. And so that's why awareness and education is so important to me, because, talking about generational things that happen, trauma, abuse, those things, addiction, a lot of times society labels those things as shameful or criminal or bad or whatever, but we don't even really understand what it is. People literally don't understand. I didn't understand. My parents didn't understand. Their parents, in a lot of ways, didn't understand what influenced all of our factors, our various factors, how it was influencing us genetically or environmentally,
Yeah, exactly.
Culturally even,
Yeah,
and,
for sure.
but also my father was, United States military. He was a retired Navy veteran. And, we were taught respect, and we were taught to obey. We were taught not to bring shame upon, our parents or our military parents, or, we tried to uphold the same level of respect and the image that my father we saw him living up to, because he
Right.
took
Yeah.
it very seriously. And, my parents were not easy on us, but at the same time, like I said, they didn't know that they were carrying trauma either. And so all of
Yeah.
us, during different courses of our lives, my parents included, my generation, even my kids now, because now they're all adults. Now they're on their own. My husband now and I have 5 children between us. They're taking off with their lives. And,
Yeah.
you ask any one of them, tell you that if there's anyone who blabs so much about this subject, it is me, it is Annette. So, but
Right. Nice.
but I have known that this information and this awareness, this education would come in handy someday. And I did not want
Yeah.
to watch my children go through any more of the hardships that they had already been through in their earlier lives as well. Because
Yeah.
I have been severely abused. I was a long-term domestic abuse victim, emotionally, physically, financially, sexually, you name it.
Right.
Um, I've been abused and hurt deeply by friends from church and pastors. And, so trauma is a lot of things. Trauma can be physical, trauma can be psychological, trauma can be financial. And the thing is other people don't get to decide what that looks like or what that feels like for the victim. And that's
Yeah.
where a lot of times we go wrong, because as a society, we're always teaching one another to, come on, suck it up, don't be soft, don't cry about it, shake it off.
Yeah.
And while a lot of people may have great intentions sometimes can bypass what that victim truly needs. And a lot of times that is to be heard.
Yeah.
It's to be heard. But I believe that as we, inform the community more about trauma, not just generational trauma, but the impact on our communities, on our families, on our politics, our governing, our education system. We could be pushing for legislation that would adapt more of this awareness and education into our public education system. We should be teaching our children
Absolutely.
young, young. I mean, there's people out there that are trained, by golly, to to teach to teach about this stuff. And you
Yeah.
know let's get some doors open so that we can teach our kids. And we teach our kids and they can go home and teach their families, because there are kids in America who were in crisis during this pandemic because they didn't want to stay at home. They
Yeah. No
wanted to go
kidding.
to school because home was scary.
Yeah.
And
Absolutely.
so we need to give our children more tools, more resources, more awareness, and more education themselves. Because a lot
Yes.
of the mental health crisis that we have going on, the root of this is trauma. I mean, let's get real.
Oh yeah.
Everybody can
Totally.
agree. Everybody will agree on that. You know what I'm saying?
Yes.
So
Absolutely.
I'm not here to advocate for politics or a political party. I'm just here as a woman, as a mother, as a wife, as a daughter, um, as a victim who got sick of everybody's bullshit and said, I've got to
Yeah.
do something about this. It took
Yeah.
me many therapists, many psychiatrists, different programs. I've been through a lot. I went back to college so that I could gain more information. And because a lot of people start out with the question, what is wrong with me?
Yeah.
Or what is
Exactly.
going on? Or, why do these people treat me like I'm garbage? Or, I mean, there's kids that are questioning that at home.
Yeah.
And it maybe even the parents, I can't say whether the parents are or are not, but I do know that regardless of the perspective a child has, they still need to be heard. And they need someone who is going to validate their feelings and make
Yes.
them help them know that they are supported and that they are safe. Because a lot of children
Yeah.
do not feel safe in our nation. And we could be spreading this message to our schools, to our churches, to our legislators. I mean, even our mental health professionals need support. They need
Yeah.
some, they need a lot of support. And a lot of people, I think, also are not aware of the ways that they can be involved to help advocate with us. We're not saying take the battle for us. You don't need to fight my battles. I got my own torch that I'm running with. We just want you to help out. We just want you to step
Right.
up and and if you see something suspicious, even report it.
Yeah.
Report.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
yeah, I've had a lot of phone calls made to the police in my past. So yeah, report it.
Absolutely. I
Documentation is really
agree. Yeah.
important.
Absolutely. You brought up, it's a very interesting point you made. Because I remember hearing a year, even a couple years ago, during the pandemic, when there was a lot of lockdowns and people were working from home, or they couldn't go out because everything was closed, or there were a lot of restrictions in place, that there were a lot of couples or families that there, like, a lot more domestic abuse and violence and child abuse was becoming more evident, and a lot of married couples were learning that their relationships weren't as strong as they thought they were, because now, instead of the day-to-day routine of either both of them or one of them going to work, and being apart for a majority of the day, now they're in the same house day after day. And there were a lot more abuse reports and violence reports being brought into the police, and the media was made aware, and they were telling us that there's a large increase in domestic violence and abuse reports and cases, because everybody was living at home all the time. There wasn't that normal day to day that everybody has been doing for, well, basically forever, if you think about
Right,
it.
right.
And it brought to light, and I think there's still a lot more to be talked about and to be brought up, because it's only a small percentage, but it really has brought to light the idea of children growing up in an age where abuse, whether it was from a father or their mother or someone else that was within the family, was never really it was never talked about, and at the same time, it was not necessarily thought of in the same way as it would be today, because, like you were saying earlier, when you were a child, you were raised by a father who was in the military, and it was almost like, this is how it's going to go, this is what we're going to do, this is how our days are going to be every day. So there really wasn't really room for negotiations, or for adjustments, or for hearing somebody else's opinion or thoughts on the matter. It was, this is how it's going to be, and if you don't like it, well, this is the consequences, right? Like, there were, especially even back then, like, I don't know how old your father was, or like, sorry, is, and his time in the war, or where he was, but there's a lot of military families out there where the father, or even now the woman in the family, more so today, they're being trained in a way that invokes trauma as part of their training, so that they're aware of everything. Like, so they're, because they have to be trained a specific way to be fully aware of their surroundings, if they're ever in battle, or if they're ever facing real enemy. They don't go in there and be nice to them and give them high fives if they do well. They're really hard on them. They're constant. It's like they're in a constant state of hypervigilance, because they want to be ready to go, right? And they don't want to have to think about what they're doing. It's just, here's the situation, do it. So that now they go through years and years of training, and they have a family, whether it's during their time or after their time in the military, and it's like they're introducing that exact method into how they're raising their family. And especially back then, when a lot of, like, a good majority of the families, it was the father who made the money, supplied all the income, bought the house, was the one that went out every day to make to work, and the mother stayed home and took care of the kids or made dinner. It was, so that was really, it was very established. And so he kind of set the rules, or, well, they basically set the rules as to how the family's going to be raised. So their methods of raising their children could, were, well, today would be considered to be verbally abusive, or likely physically, like a lot of physical abuse, or very strict discipline, very
Yeah.
hard discipline, right?
Drill sergeants.
Yeah, exactly. And there were a couple TV shows that were out in the 90s. I think the one I remember watching, I don't know if you were familiar with it, was called Major Dad,
Hmm.
where the man he was in the military, and he married into a widowed family. Like, I think it was the mother and a couple kids who were daughters, and so he was introducing his lifestyle and his way of raising children, and he learned how to adapt and kind of soften up. But that's not really reality for the most part. It's a lot straight and narrow, very strict, very, like,
Very, very.
my way or the highway kind
Yeah.
of
And
raising.
it's not, I mean, and of course it is that way for a reason.
Yeah,
And it has to be. It is one of the
yeah,
safest, secure entities in our nation. You know what I'm saying?
yes,
And
yeah,
so it's not all bad, and it's
no,
not a matter of even right or wrong. It's a matter of that, like you said, it is the way it is.
yeah,
Um, my children's father is also ex-military, and same thing. You want to present yourself to be the best,
yes,
and you want to be the best and sharpest at what you do. But as
yeah,
children, that's a lot to take on.
absolutely,
Not that it's wrong to want to be the best. It's just it's learning, helping our kids to be able to strive to be the best, to work at what they do, etc., to take pride in that,
yeah,
to not be a moocher. Nobody wants to raise their kids to be, you know
no,
moochers or
absolutely,
taking advantage of people or any of that. So, my kids this day know I will give you a hand up, but I'm not here to give handouts. They've heard me say that, So,
yeah,
um, but at the same time, they know that they can come to me and I will support them however I'm able to,
right,
within my boundaries and my needs. So, we've had to work through a lot of those things. But yes, as kids, as we grow up and we mature and we adapt, I was a wild teenager at times. I love, I was academic. I was very athletic. I've
yeah,
always been adventurous. I've always been an outdoors person. Um, I tried to excel at everything I did. I grew into being an overachiever, and I took that same overachiever. I want the awards and the medals and you know what I mean? I just wanted to be the
right,
best. Even though I wasn't in the military, I had been a military dependent, and that carried on with me throughout life. I mean, even to
right.
this. But if we have more resources, and I kind of said all that to say, try to sum
No,
it
that's
up.
fine. Yeah, yeah,
Um, it's not, the thing here is not about just trying to teach people about trauma or to talk about how parents impact their kids because of how they were impacted, and blah, blah, blah. My thing is,
yeah,
because we bring in awareness, we are able to better address a lot of the the hardships, the burdens, the traumas, these difficulties that we face um, as individuals and in our
Yeah.
families and all that. If we have more tools and more resources, you know, but then we're better prepared to be healthier and
Yeah.
to I watched my mother when my father was away flying in the military. She would work. She was taking care of helping us with our schoolwork or whatever. She was in the Wives Club, the Navy Wives Club. She was very
Yeah.
involved in the community. She played sports, softball, volleyball. I mean, our family was very active and very involved in the community. But but you do all of that, and then when we don't understand that we maybe have unmet needs or that we're missing support that we really could benefit from, that I think that looking back now would have made such a difference, you know,
Yes.
and
Absolutely.
because I can remember trying to go to counseling when I was younger, and even my parents going with me too, and my brother, and just being, I think all of us left that first appointment kind of scratching our heads and going, what was this about? Like, I don't even understand. Why are we here? Like, because my parents
Mm.
thought that there was something about my behaviors or my brother's behaviors or whatever that is saying, oh gosh, is there something wrong? We better get some help. So they knew that much, but we did not understand
Right.
what it was we needed, why we, because back then, this is years ago.
Yeah.
Um, like, well, yeah, a long time ago. We don't need to get specific again. And
No.
but back then we just didn't understand it. And we've come a long way with having more resources and, a lot more tools and a lot more awareness and education, but there's still a long way to go. A long way to
Absolutely.
go because society does influence a lot of our belief systems even.
Yeah.
And, there's a lot of um, you know, collaborative groups or organizations that, life is supposed to be lived with this way, that life is supposed to be believed this way.
Yeah.
And we put so much pressure on one another about what other people's perceptions and perspectives about
Yeah.
themselves and the world and everything, what those are instead of what our own are. And it makes it tough sometimes because,
Yeah.
when you're healing
Yeah.
from trauma, you're healing from abuse, it's not linear. Your experiences may be different than my experiences. Your
Yeah.
needs may be different than my needs. And so healing's not linear. If trauma isn't linear, then healing definitely isn't linear. And so we
No.
might have different needs. And it took me years and years in my recovery to get to a place where, I realized that my religion that I had been a part of, that it was re-traumatizing me and re-traumatizing me. And I just said, I can't do this. This is going to hem up my recovery. And I got to find a way to work through this and then find
Yeah.
out if this isn't a fit for me at this point, then what is,
Yeah.
and I thought about
Absolutely.
that and I thought, why is there so much pressure and why am I even banking on that question? Right now, I just want to heal. I want to rebuild my life and my relationships. I'm in a place now where everything that I have lost and sacrificed during the most horrific hell I've ever lived, I now have again, and it's a big deal for me. you
Yeah.
know. So that's why I advocate. That is why I try to share my story. That's why people hear me rattling off about my experiences or the
Yes.
things that I'm able to be involved in. And it's not nothing to do with pride about myself. It's more about the fact that there's too many people that are becoming ill physically
Yeah.
and mentally. Um, People are dying because of trauma.
Yeah.
And,
Absolutely.
and and even veterans, even military and veterans, like they fight a lot for, better health care and better resources and not having to wait for God knows how long to even get in for an appointment. And,
Yeah.
so there's a lot of obstacles. There's a lot of, there's a lot of military issues. There's a lot of civilian issues. There's just, like I said, trauma is complex. And I
Oh,
think that
yeah.
the more we help people understand the complexity of that, and how we also need to break trauma down and break down what abuse is, because not everybody even agrees on abuse. So we have to
Yeah.
pay attention to what the law and what the mental health system says abuse is, because
Yeah.
that's what we have to work with right now. That's what we're up against. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
So,
Yeah.
yeah.
Well, I think like I was I've been thinking about this for a while, and when you were talking about the whole understanding and awareness and having a better understanding of what each trauma is and the fact that it isn't linear. I was thinking like even it's still very evident in everything that we see. Like when you look on Twitter a lot, and you go to like Facebook pages, or you go online and you read an article, and the article might not necessarily be agreeing with people's opinions, and you look at the responses, and it could be just comments, right? Or it's just people who are having conversations on Twitter, and there's someone who's being a little too extreme, or a little too far left or too far right for what most people think is appropriate, or the norm. And people's responses, and it's amazing how it's been since any major, like serious major war for anybody. Like I know the last time the US really had any serious war where it was really really bad was Vietnam. And I know that the Iraqi wars are a little more one-sided, obviously, but still, like, that's not the point of this. Is that they the comments and the people out there, the acceptance of this awareness of people's emotions, people's feelings, people's concerns for people, or for groups, or for changes to help people, like for whether it's healthcare or mental health, or trying to help children, or right. And there's a lot of people out there whose attitudes towards it are still very like, oh, like toughen up, or we've gone soft, or there's a lot of people who are the word I hear a lot is like there's a lot of snowflakes out there, or all this woke crowd. And there's a lot of people where they always say, I miss the days where it was where if there was a bully for a school, they would take care of it themselves, and they would have a fight in the schoolyard, and that would settle it, instead of the child who's being bullied all the time going to the principal, or having to have intervention by professionals to stop it. And then the people are going there, well, why can't the kid just take care of it himself? Like there's still a lot of it today, like I said, where it's just the attitude towards like trying to help others, or mental health related discussions. There's a good majority of people out there that still think that we should be like it was back in the 70s, or like, or the 60s, where it was do it this way. There's not, you're not hurt, you're just you've got a scratch, oh big deal. Or like I had a football coach, and this was back in the late 90s, when his famous words were, if somebody got hurt, he was always saying, oh, it's a long way from the heart. So that was like his way of saying it's not a big deal, like you're not dead, you're fine, it's just a little bump or whatever.
Right.
So
Right.
it's like the only way you're going to get any serious, like people taking you seriously, or really giving you any sort of like really pay attention to you and take it seriously is if something really bad happens, or if it affects a lot of people. So if it's it, I can imagine if I was 21 years old in 1970, going to my father and saying I'm dealing with a bully, or I'm dealing with traumatic events, the first thing he would say was, well, go teach him, go have a fight, or go teach him who's boss, tell him, show him who's boss, and then he'll leave you alone, and they'll all leave you alone. And I grew up in a time where one parent wanted it this way and another parent wanted it a completely opposite way, because like, it was always talk with your fists rather than using your opinion or your voice, or having empathy, or showing emotions for somebody, and showing support, and showing compassion. People who were different, even it's still obviously today, anybody who's slightly different is looked at in an odd way. They're not given compassion. Instead, it's prosecution, or it's verbal assault, or like, it happens all the time. It's out there in the media. I'm not saying that there isn't good, obviously, that occurs. It's just that it seems like you always see it, all the negative on in TV and everywhere and on social media. That anytime there's a traumatic event, if it's not a big event like the shootings, or something that affects everybody, a lot of people don't really take it seriously, because they think of the U.S. as a big tough country, where everybody's, take care of yourself, and be
Yeah.
tough, be strong, don't
Soldier up.
be a wimp. Yeah, yeah, exactly. And that's the thing, is we've gone through how many generations of kids becoming parents, having kids, right, and then becoming grandparents, and again, and the lack of change from one parent to their child to the next, and again, where the trauma and the abuse just passes down, and there's very little that's ever done. And as soon as there is any push for change, there's a lot of pushback, and there's a lot of negative feedback, because so many people are really, in my opinion, are really scared of looking at it from a view other than toughen up, you're just soft, or be a man. The change is really difficult, and it seems like a lot of people are really hesitant to accept that and do it.
Yeah, that's a lot. It's really a lot. Um,
Yeah.
because I think about this a lot. I think about this all the time.
Right.
And I get what you're talking about. I think a lot of this comes down to our perspectives and what is influencing our perspective at the time of the event.
Right.
So as a small child, if I got a spanking, I thought I was bad. I thought I
Absolutely.
did something bad, and mom or dad was angry with me. And so that's why I was getting hit,
Yeah.
As I got older, a little bit older, and was spanked, then at that time, the perspective was more like, why is somebody that teaches us not to hitting me to teach me?
Yeah.
So, it wasn't because, and I'm not here to say whether that was right or wrong, and I'm talking about whether maybe, I might have been 9 or 10 or something, but anyway, but that was part of my maturity. That was part of my perspectives changing as I was maturing and developing. And
Yeah.
then as I become older, with my kids, you know, I, I could probably count on one hand how many spankings that they got, because it was something that I never felt super comfortable with.
Right.
Um, because I realized that looking back, reflecting on my life, that I don't know, just for me personally, I feel like I'm sending a conflicting message here. So I'm going to find some other ways to find solutions. So so that was kind of my take, my perspective, which started me off in how I was parenting my own children.
Right. Yeah.
And unfortunately, when their father and I divorced, that was when I went into a very abusive relationship. And that
Yeah.
was the start of bringing a lot of my old junk to light. And I'm talking about stuff that was never even understood, talked
Yeah.
about, or supported during my time involved in the church. And when I did try to talk to people about my depression, my anxiety, and how it was increasing, and I don't understand what's happening, and you know, like nobody knows the signs of abuse either.
Yeah.
And
That's true.
when I went to pastors for help, it was, we need you to tough it out. We need you here to teach Sunday school. We need you, and nobody wanted to hear me. Nobody was listening. And we lack that
Yeah.
listening part so much. Like for me, even through my recovery, I had to step back and say, are my listening skills as great as I have thought they were? And I came to find out that they were horrible.
Okay.
And, so I realized through my own experiences of people not hearing me, not listening to me, sometimes it was because they didn't want to. It made them uncomfortable. But there were also times where they couldn't because of the place that I was coming from at the time and the way that I was communicating and approaching the situation.
Right.
However, anybody in an abusive relationship knows that it only gets worse. It doesn't get better.
Yeah.
It just stops. And that um, if you leave one time and you go back, it will happen again. And so
Absolutely.
it took me like 5, 6 times before I finally was done for good. And that was over a 13-year span.
Yeah.
And, and so what it did was it took how I was raised as a child and all of the toxicity and trauma that I went through as a child, any inappropriateness from other adults or sexual assault type things. These are things that I didn't even know I needed to deal with them. And I sure as heck couldn't talk about it because at
Yeah.
that time I just didn't know how to handle it, what to do about it. But if people know the signs, if we know the signs, then maybe more people will step up. Maybe more people will feel comfortable to say, hey, you know, is there something going on? Are you dealing with something heavy? Or, it's
Yeah.
just, and it's not trying to fix people. That's the thing. It's not
Yeah.
trying to
Correct. Yeah.
fix a lot of people's problems. It's not trying to necessarily say, hey, you better get some psychological help, because you've got some generational trauma that you've got to get healed. We've all been there where we want
Yeah.
to save the world and save our family and, because we don't want them to go through the same pain that we do.
No.
But it's more about, listening, learning to listen and learning what, these generational cycles are and how they contribute to our future decision making, even the types of,
Totally.
because when abuse is normalized, you don't know
Yeah.
you're being abused. And when people are very psychologically dysfunctional, um, people that have severe personality disorders,
Yeah.
antisocial, folks that I've known that were not under care, um,
Yeah.
it can be hell. It can be dark, dark hell. And
Yeah.
I knew what it's like to fight for my life. And, I never knew, I never thought I would be a statistic. I never thought that would be And even when my daughter first started talking to me, or a couple people started saying, this is she's doing, your partner's doing this, and what, that's, you don't deserve that. And it was just like, oh, I got this. Oh, I got this, because that was my mindset as a kid and growing up and as an overachiever. I can handle anything, I can do anything, I can fix anything. And that was my mindset. But that mindset also helped me to dismiss signs along the way.
Yes, exactly. I
And,
agree.
and
Yeah.
that's why we have to talk about it. And that's why it's good to talk about it everywhere, because, if we can see trauma, if we know trauma and we understand it, then we can help advocate for people. And I'm not saying people should be running up and down the streets saying, hey, I got some information.
Right. Yeah,
Although
yeah.
sometimes I feel like it, I tell you.
I
But
know.
yeah, it's just, this is why I'm passionate about it. And, my husband and I have really come a long way in our past few years of marriage. But we've had our times. We've done a recovery program together, and we both have a therapist, and we take our self-care and our mental health and well-being very seriously. Um, and
Yeah.
we support one another, but we've also had to learn how to listen, and we've also had to learn in breaking a lot of these generational cycles, where
Yeah.
we end and where the other begins. Um, and because a lot of times there are people that are coming from, two different family units. When you have
Yeah.
families and you take in a whole bunch of different dynamics and very complex backgrounds and history, and being there ourselves, there's a lot of challenges in and of that itself. There's a lot of adjustments that have to be made. And so it took us a long time to work through some of these things and say, okay, even raising adult kids, where do I end as a parent and where do they begin as their own identity, their own person, not just as my child that I love, but as their own person. And,
Right.
so it's a really complex. Generational trauma is definitely a very complex topic.
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, you mentioned mindset about like the symptoms. Like I was thinking, yeah, we we live in an age still where the mindset, where our responses to someone is not a positive response for a lot of them. Where instead of someone like, which is why so many people still are so afraid of bringing it up, because they don't know who, if that the person they're in front of or they're talking to, they don't know if that person's is going to accept and support them and say, I hear what you're saying. This is really, I'm sorry that you face this. What can we do to help you? They want something like that, instead of, they're scared that that person's going to go, nah, it's nothing. You're like, it's not that serious. Or are you sure? Like there's always that doubting or that skepticism of the person that you're afraid of, which is why a lot of people hold back and they're so scared to bring it up, because there's, especially like, not as much today, but probably 20, 30 years ago, it was probably really a good possibility that the person that they tell, it might get back to the one that's causing the abuse to begin with. There was always that possibility, because especially if you're living in a small town or somewhere where there's aren't very many people, and maybe they know everybody, there is that possibility where you tell someone and you're trusting that that person is going to help you.
Right.
They might not believe you, or they might think that you're just that there's something going on that maybe you're not telling the truth about. So they go and say, I hear your girlfriend, or I hear your wife says that you're being that you're beating her, or that you're being mean, or you're being verbally abusive, and back, that person, that man's, their instinct is to, that's not true. Like, I'm supporting them, I'm being caring, I love them, I'm giving them everything they need and want to live. So they get mad and they take offense. So they, and if they're really potentially bad or abusive, that could get worse for that person. So there's all these multiple angles or possibilities that could play into it, and
Yeah.
it leads to them not it being so scared to say something. And it's still there today, like, it maybe to not that degree
Definitely.
necessarily, but it's still pretty, there's,
Well,
that's the
this
problem.
it is because the stigmas and the amount of shaming
Yeah.
is still going on. I mean, I became fearful of telling, even talking about when I started really, back in the late 90s, mid to late 90s, I started really questioning how, how my anxiety was, and feeling some depression coming on, and like it wasn't something for me to be concerned about, type of thing,
Right.
and so I did try to talk to some friends at church about it.
Yeah.
And my one friend's husband said, well, that's a sign that you're bound by Satan, you know? And so
Right.
now, granted, I didn't believe that.
Yeah. Yeah.
I said, no, I think this has more in reference to do with my mental health. And
Yeah.
he said, you need to take this to God. This is a spiritual matter. And I thought, brother, you only knew how many years I've been taking it to God.
Yeah.
So,
Right.
at that point, Russ, at that point, I questioned, are these trustworthy people? Now, I didn't only have just that one incident. If I do share with my story and people say, well, I'm sorry you had a bad time in church, like, but don't throw it, the baby out with the bathwater. And I'm like, I'm not talking about one incident. I'm talking about generations of things that are being taught in church that are
Yeah.
complicating our health and well-being emotionally, on an emotional and
Yeah.
on a mental level and on a spiritual level, because again, that's where I said learning where we end and another person begins. There has to be a level of respect there and a level of trust there. And that response told me this was not the kind of support that I need to put my trust in. So I chose at
Yeah.
that time to just trust myself to find the support that I needed. And I did, but it was the same story. Every church I went to, part of pioneering churches, I mean, just for years and years and years and years and years. And I just finally said, I keep getting the same responses. I keep seeing the same things. Um, and I feel like I'm banging my head against the wall here, and it feels toxic to me. So I'm just going to have to step back, and
Yeah.
by just focusing on my recovery, and finding the things in my life that are authentic, that help me to heal and also help to close up some of those wounds from the past.
Right.
Some I don't know if they'll ever be closed. And I've learned how to be okay with that, even though it wasn't easy. But
No.
the ones that
I
have,
bet.
I have found my place, and I have found ways to um, contribute to my well-being, whether it's mentally or spiritually or physically. I love it. I love being absorbed in my self-care and my recovery. And for me, it's every
Yeah.
day. And it's kind of like addiction. It's an everyday thing. And when you're
Right.
dealing with complex trauma, that is what
Yes.
it's like. It is something that we have to literally manage on a daily basis. And a lot of people do
Yeah.
not even understand complex trauma, and why
No.
complex trauma throughout our generations, why it gets as bad as that we see it today. That's because it hasn't been addressed.
No. There's so much that still needs to happen. Like, I think if even in 2022, amazingly enough, we've just started to scratch the surface of it. And
Right.
it's difficult to get anywhere when there's still a lot of past generations that are having a large influence on things like mental health, personal well-being, um, like not like the day of tough it up or tough it out or you're it's just a scratch or why are you being weak, why are you crying, why all these different negative things that get said all the time.
Yeah.
There's still a lot of that generation that's their belief, that's how they were raised, and that's how
Yeah. I
they
was raised that
shared.
way.
Yeah, and they shared that with their family, with their kids.
Hmm. Hmm.
And so many of them still kind of have that mentality of it's not something like most, and it's I'm not saying that it's only on one side, but for a lot of men out there, it's not something like any kind of mental health issue, whether it's a trauma, whether it's a disability that's causing them to struggle with education or whatever it might be. There's still so many of them out there where that thought and that belief that it's you can't tell anybody, or you can't talk to your friends about it, or you can't talk to your wife or your best friend because their first thought that they're going to have is going to be a negative thought or isn't going to be supportive, so they just keep it to themselves.
Yes.
And right, like that's still there for a good majority of males out there. And there's so much evidence of that being the case, because all I have to do is look at my own audience and see that, like, I was just looking today again, and of all the audience that I have, 72% of my audience are women. And
Yes.
it's, as far as getting, like, trying to get men to discuss their trauma and their mental health problems that they're dealing with, it's extremely difficult to get them to talk about it. Whereas women are way more open to doing so. But I think a lot of that is, well, okay, so quite frankly, a lot of it is genetic, and some of it is, and there's a good portion of that is the way they were brought up. Like, especially in the last 50 years, where, like, women have always been the emotional support for their family, for their children, the ones that the kids go when they get hurt, or when they're sad, or when they need somebody to give them a hug. The mother is the one that tends to be the one they always go to.
Sure.
So it's no surprise that women are way more open and willing to discuss their mental illnesses, their struggles, their trauma. I know a lot of men go through trauma, obviously, and it's just they're less open to discussing it due to stigma and to the negative thoughts and beliefs that's been passed down to them, and that's so common among so many families out there.
Sure. Yeah. Well,
Yeah,
I mean, our culture alone, and I'm not even talking just religiously or whatever,
yeah,
the culture has um, supported the concept of a man being the head of the household. I mean,
yeah,
these are a lot of teachings that go way back.
yeah,
And when I speak and share about things publicly in regards to um, domestic abuse or holding men accountable or holding parents accountable, holding kids accountable, whatever, like I have been accused of being, some radical feminist and all of these things. And I am like,
right,
no, I'm not, because I was the first woman to support my husband into seeking some support and help for himself. And I've
yeah,
always been like that. I've always supported everybody getting help for themselves. What I'm about is accountability. And so it doesn't matter what your gender is. I don't care about your gender, you know? And
Yeah.
so, but we live in a society where men have had to suck it up.
Yeah.
So they tell you to suck it up. And then if you don't, then you're labeled as weak or soft or whatever. And
Yeah.
I was just speaking with someone on Twitter about this the other day, and it broke my heart because he is going through, some recovering from some real deep trauma and some huge financial repercussions because of it. And,
Yeah.
we know all about narcissistic abuse and what the the damage can look like. So I won't go into all that topic right now today, but he was mentioning that all the people he says that support me and are helping me through this, Annette, are like you, like everyone is a woman. Where are all the men? He said, where are all of the guys that I need, like I need some guys to support me, and
Yeah.
they don't, where are they? And that it just really broke my heart. And I thought, this is a result of our society though. And I'm not saying that society has spoken too much on women and children by any means. What
Yeah.
I'm saying is this is where our message is so important to say. Men need support too. You can
Absolutely.
be you can be you can be a man's man. You can be, that idea of what you believe a man is, because nobody else has a right to decide what that looks like for you. But at the same
Absolutely.
time, we have to get this message out that, dude, it's okay if you cry, though. You can be tough. You can heal from this. You can acknowledge your feelings. You can need support. You can seek help. Like, that's what we need to normalize. We need to stop
Yeah.
normalizing trauma and abuse and start normalizing seeking help. And
Absolutely.
but people aren't going to do that until they know they have a safe place to do so.
I agree. I think the and it does. I think the first thing that needs to change now, it's a broad area. I'm not saying one specific thing necessarily, but it the change will have to happen in areas that men are are interested in or look up to or think is important, like things like TV, movies, social media, role models, sports, whether it's athletes or announcers, all these different areas. In order for anything to really have any chance or to start moving towards that possibility, is that all those areas there needs to be a change in their view and how they talk about it, because every time now I haven't exactly seen a lot of movies where men are discussing their mental health. I know whenever it seems to have a movie about a man who's dealing with mental health, it's him struggling alone or taking it out on society or struggling with it with family abuse, but you never see him ever talk about it. And you always, like, the thing I always notice is anytime a man brings up anything about feelings or something that's not manly, his friends give him the weird look, or they go, let's not talk about that. Let's go get a beer, right? Or let's do man stuff, or let's go and watch sports or whatever. And they always, it's like they're always brushing it off, or they always go, huh? That doesn't. Why are you being this way? Rather than going, oh, I understand. Yeah. Well, let's go have a drink and we can discuss it. Like, why don't we talk about it rather than just
Right.
going and
Right.
watching the game on the TV at the bar and getting drunk and never thinking about it again. It's like more sports athletes being able to like on TV when they've won a big game or they've had a great moment, and they're able and willing to express their emotions and how they feel, and really show what they're really thinking and feeling. The more that this occurs in society and it's publicly shown, over time, more and more males, and especially children who are seeing this, are going to grow up learning and believing that it's okay to express how they feel, to not worry about somebody else having a negative opinion if they're dealing with mental illness, or they're having a really bad time because they had a friend who moved, or someone close to them passed away, or they're dealing with addiction or something. They're not going to feel afraid to speak up to their best friend, or to their dad or their mother, or a teacher. It They'll feel more willing to do it because they're not going to be afraid of the negative repercussions due to society's belief that men should be strong and tough and not show emotion, and face it head on. We've got to move away from that. But the only way is it has to be stuff that's public, like I said, like the media, TV, movies, sports, stuff. These areas have to influence it, because that's how things become more accepted, and eventually become the norm, and become a welcome change, is the influences that are upon these people.
Right. And those influences run long and deep, you know,
Absolutely.
they run long and
Yeah.
deep. I mean, you look at, because the United States, I mean, Western society, Western civilization, and Eastern civilization have a whole different set of rules,
Yeah.
and where one culture may be more about the larger social group and
Yeah.
group being. The United States is so diverse, and we have much more individualized, independent mentalities here, um,
Yeah.
which is in which is our blessing and our curse, though, too,
Yeah.
because
Absolutely.
in overabsorption of the whole I complex, me, 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 me. But that being said, those cultural ideals play so much into complex trauma. And the thing I think people don't understand about complex trauma does not mean that you are a destroyed person and that you are um, a crazy person, that you are not in your right mind, that, the thing about complex trauma is, like I said, complex trauma can be something like a baby learning to walk and it falls and bumps its head on the coffee table. That is
Yeah.
trauma. Complex is what makes it the difference between post trauma and then complex trauma is longevity, severity, and all of that, which we know. But
Yeah.
there's just different factors and variables involved. And the thing is that these cultural ideals come into play where you look at the complex trauma of racism, and that's a whole nother show. you know
Yeah. No kidding.
and so no wonder men don't know who to talk to. No wonder some men don't even feel like they're accepted as men.
Yeah.
Some they are come from cultures where to speak out and speak up about abuse would be your death, you know.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So these people maybe that might be a different culture. That is still here in America. There are still cultures here where even if it's not to an extreme, there's still going to be consequences and a price to pay,
Yeah.
So
For sure.
it, for men especially, it is, I think, a harder barrier for us as a society. Um,
Yeah.
Probably that's something that we have to work at a lot more.
Absolutely. There's a long way to go, because so many people, there's still that stigma, that stereotype, where, like I said earlier, where men are taught through generation by generation all the time to be tough, to take your emotions or take your fears and push them down, and be strong, and fight through it,
Yeah.
and show your strength, rather than be willing to, or feel that you can express how you really feel, how you really are thinking about something. And it's if when it's pushed on you by so many different sources, right? Like your father or your teachers or your friends or like your school the coach on your for your team, all these different angles, even the church, like the pastor or the fa or the pastor from the church or whatever, they're also influencing that child's behavior and their how they're supposed to show like emotion or lack of emotion. Like there's so many different outside influences that train and teach this child as he grows up to behave a certain way, to to keep everything in and not show anybody. It's stuff like that that's holding society back from getting into that next stage,
Right.
and there's a lot of resistance
Well,
for
there's
it.
trauma all around us too. I mean,
Absolutely.
and we're trying to break through the trauma. We're trying to heal, but there's just trauma after trauma after trauma. And so, more
Yeah.
trauma. And, I mean, like even speaking as a parent of both females and males,
Yeah.
um, I can remember saying to the daughters when they were younger, you better grow some thick skin, you know. Of course, later on, I was like, what kind of thing is that to tell my kid? I mean, not that it's a bad thing. There's truth
Yeah.
to it. It is, but it's how we communicate sometimes, because it wasn't that she didn't have thick skin. It was that she was having an issue or a crisis that I felt she was overreacting, and for
Right.
her, she did not feel she was.
Yeah.
Or telling our boys, you need to suck it up. You don't cry during the baseball game, or, those types of things. And you're right,
Yeah.
pass those things on. And it doesn't make us all bad parents at all. You know,
No,
it,
no, not at
it
all.
doesn't mean that, just because we talk about abuse, there's so many parents out there going, oh, now you're calling me an abuser. And it's like, we have to be so careful anymore about every little thing we say
Yeah.
and how people interpret it. But at the same time, we have to remember that I'm only responsible for myself and you are only responsible for yourself.
Yeah,
And
absolutely.
that's a tough one sometimes.
Yeah. Well, the
Yeah.
only person who's ever going to stop the the repetitiveness or the passing it down, like that, the abuse is themselves. They're the only ones who can stop it. They can't stop someone else, like, well, in some ways they can, not necessarily legally or against their will, but like as when it comes to the surefire way of stopping the that abuse from being passed down and keep and continuing to go year after year and generation upon generation is by stopping their own, like, doing it themselves. They have to step up and they have to go, all right, I realize that my father or my mother was narcissistic, or I was neglected as a child, or I was abused, or I didn't get raised by great parents. I'm not going to be that way. And they may have to do some therapy to to get to healing process, to get closer to being in the right place and making the right decisions and doing what's right for that person that they're taking care of, whether it's their child or whether it's their significant other, like their wife or husband. They have to make the choice of stopping that line, and that's the only way that their child is going to never experience it, and then they won't know what it is. They're going to know is that they were raised in a loving family that supported them, that met their needs, that raised them in a way that was beneficial, so that when they became an adult, they didn't have to deal with severe trauma or neglect, and they were able to live happy lives. And then their family is the same way. but it has to be that person saying, I'm not going to do this. This is not me. That's the only way it's going to make, any, it's going to stop. And it's going to take a number of generations and people and a number of people to finally stand up and stop it.
Yep. And I think that again, that brings us right back around to an earlier, as far as we have to create credible tools, incredible resources, incredible
Yes.
information. The social media in and of itself is bombarded with all kinds of armchair physicians, armchair psychiatrists and psychologists, and everybody thinking
Yeah.
that they're life coaches or
Yeah.
trauma informed even. And I've had some negative experiences on social media from other people who were being very abusive, who were supposed to be advocating for. And I mean, that a lot of that was what started really putting my recovery in check and saying, I need to be really careful that I am not going
Yeah.
against what I'm here advocating for. And that's why I mostly just try to share my story, my experiences,
Yeah.
my education and the knowledge that I have um, in the forms that I do, because, it's needed out there. But am I opposed
Absolutely.
to all of this being open on social media? Not at all. I just think that that's why we have to push for more credible resources. And
Yes.
no, don't just
Absolutely.
listen to every claim for this topic.
Yeah. No, I agree. Like,
I've
I,
had to check myself at times, even with family, honestly. I really have. I've had to say, wow, I sound like a hypocrite. And I
yeah.
don't want.
No, I know. I've had the same thing. I've been reminded a number of times where there are behaviors that I produce and that I show that in the moment that it's occurring, I'm not aware, but I get told you're behaving like your father, like you're like your father, and I sit back and I go, gee, I didn't realize that I was being that way. And then it's immediately, you start thinking about all these things that you don't want to reproduce or you don't want to bring forward from that time. And yet, unless at first that you really work on it, you really are hard on yourself, and you're always checking and being aware, it's very difficult to just stop bringing all those behaviors and all those negative, like, things that you don't want to keep going. It's not as simple as just saying, I don't want to, I'm not going to do that,
Yeah.
because yeah, it happens, and the only way is being aware of the fact that it is occurring, and being proactive and stopping yourself and going, okay, wow, I didn't realize that I was doing that. I'm so sorry. I had no idea. And then being proactive the next time and going, okay, I realized that I said this or I did that behavior and I didn't want to. But it wasn't just as simple as me saying, all right, I'm gonna be better the next time. And if it was as simple as just saying it, we'd have a lot of our problems solved.
Right.
It's a
Right.
built-in behavior it's not an easy thing to just stop. It takes time and it takes effort and it takes a lot of self-awareness to get to the point where it does eventually stop. And I honestly don't know how many people are really strong enough today to be able to do that. And I'm not saying that they're not capable. It's just they don't necessarily realize just how much work is involved when it comes to preventing the past behaviors and trauma and abuse from being carried forward. It's not an easy thing.
And I think that I loved about I was involved in codependency on this for a while, and
Yeah.
it's a program that, even though there are parts of it that I didn't really care for, um, it taught me so much. It really, the program itself taught me a lot. And I decided
Right.
that I was going to take from the program and from the 12 steps, and I was going to use what would work for me. And you know what I mean? So,
Yeah.
and that's the thing is because healing trauma is like, you know, putting a recipe together, and there is no one recipe that's going to work for everybody.
No.
But that's a lot because it taught me what my brother or other people in my family who were up against addiction, it taught me just how grueling that battle is.
Oh,
And,
yeah.
and it wasn't until I decided to do a 12 step myself that I wasn't able to get inside of his head. And I didn't ever understand it, you know, and he didn't know how to explain it to me at the time in active addiction to make it make sense because
Yeah.
his mind wasn't right at the time. But even when he was, you know, in recovery, it was really for me. And I thought, you know, what better way to understand my role as an enabler, my role as a codependent in my family, you know, my role in gaining knowledge. Like the only way I can do that is if I do a program myself.
Yeah.
And that's when I call and got some information and decided that I was going to. And I was afraid because at the time I was still very much living in defense mode and in fear for my life. And, you know, so it was
Yeah, for sure.
and so, but it did teach me a lot and it helped me to see so many different things that I hadn't seen before. And to understand that there's a lot of complexities and obstacles when it comes to our healing.
Absolutely. I think there's so much that still needs to be done, and the I I'm afraid to say that because of I guess, well, yeah, in the States there's been a major, in my opinion, I think there's been a major step backwards in that progress, because I don't want to say that there's one side that's wrong and the other side that isn't. I'm not advocating for one or the other, because that's not me necessarily. Like, we've gone in the U.S. There's been so much that has happened in the last 5 6 years that has really, like, brought out to a large degree a lot of really bad, like, negative, like, behaviors and personalities, and this, like, I don't know if I've ever seen it quite like that before, and it's so polarizing. And the thing is the US has always been a nation that, for the longest time, people always would be used as the measuring stick for so many things, because it was the land, like, it was the place that people would always go to have freedom, and to have opportunity, and to start a new life. And it's something that everybody looks at, if they want to leave their country, and they're feeling persecuted. The first thing they often, or first place they often think about is the United States, because it's a land of opportunity. And the like, but they've taken a major step backwards. And with this pandemic, and with the polarizing problem that we've had, and with social media getting so big and such an importance to so many people, mental health has really, like, the need for it has grown so much. Like,
Yes.
I don't even think we've seen the tip of it. And the sad part is the people that need to help, and to recognize this need, aren't doing anything. They're more concerned about other areas that are, to them, are the most important, but they don't realize. And I think it might be a little too late when they finally do realize that the reality is the biggest area that needs a lot of attention is mental health. And there's a lot of people out there that are suffering, and they're the country's future. And it's it's difficult when a lot of them are suffering from mental illnesses due to trauma or a pandemic, or always feeling all they ever get is negative comments and negative, like, they never, social media is never a good experience. Like, yeah, there's the people that need to do the work aren't helping and are not doing what is necessary.
Yeah, and boy, that's a tough one, Russ.
Yeah.
Um, for me, I think there's so many layers to that. Um,
Yeah.
I don't want to get into my politics per se.
No, I don't really want to either, to be honest.
That's another
It's
show.
just, yeah, there is a reality that
Is
I yeah.
why that global events around the world are calling us a mental health crisis. That are the
Yeah.
situation. It's not even a situation. The state in right now that it's
Yeah.
a crisis, and there's a lot of factors there are outside of
Mhm.
politics. And the sad thing is, we all need the help. We all need support ever. I don't care what you or what party. We all need support.
Yeah.
Um, I definitely um, a leadership ever before, and things just began to spiral,
Yeah.
and global experts were heeding warnings and saying this is what's going to happen if we do not gain some control over the crises that we are seeing take place in our nation.
Yeah. Yeah.
Trauma and violence was being constantly incited.
Yeah.
The whole, and like I said, it just kept going back. Us, them, us, them, us, them. And like you said way earlier today, where's the family that we used to be? And that's what bothers me, when my dad says he doesn't recognize the country you fought for. It breaks my heart because we really needed help. And the thing is, the pandemic also really did not help. I think that it did, um, impede a lot of people's well-being and their state of mind, and increase, some instances of depression and anxiety, or, there was unfortunately more cases of suicide, and there's been just
Yeah.
it's horrible. Therapists are saying that their offices are filling up, and then
Yeah.
we've got have medical experts, hospitals, medical offices, mental health offices. All these folks are so burnt out. People are leaving
Yes.
careers in healthcare. People are
Yeah.
afraid to start careers in healthcare. And
Yeah.
I understand that. I always felt burnt out anyway. But now this is nothing like we have seen in generations. So it's just
No
like,
kidding. Yeah.
so yeah, it's been a lot. Mental health, I think, should be on the top of everyone's priority, whether as a person, as a family, as a community, as a church, as a nation. We've got to take this seriously and
Absolutely.
stop with the mentality of it's not my problem.
No. Yeah. I know. The last thing I'm going to say before I end the show here is, and I've said this a couple times on previous episodes now, is I saw a stat, and I had a picture and I was trying to find it and I couldn't find it. It's somewhere, but I don't remember where I put it. Anyways, it was a photo of a stat in the U.S. showing leading causes of death in the USA, and if I hadn't looked at it first, my initial thought that it would have been things like heart disease and cancer and other areas that like are all medically related issues like obesity and all that. I always thought that was like in the high areas of the numbers. And then I saw the stat and it was shocking to me. At the same time, I went, it's not a big surprise when I think about it. Is the leading cause of death in the US at 63% was trauma. And it just blew my mind because I'm like, oh my God, like that's a large percent. Like that's triple cancer and heart disease. And like they always say that cancer is a leading cause of death among people or smoking or like heart disease, and yet you never ever hear on TV in ads anything about mental health. Well, you do, but it's very rare compared to the other ones about mental health. And no one ever brings up the fact that it's a large majority of deaths in the US are from trauma related situations, whether it's suicide or just like, right? Like it is unbelievable. And
Ads on addiction or
yeah,
that any else health
yeah,
related even.
yeah,
It's mind boggling because it's going to be a very, very long, hard process. I feel even the next decade is going to be unlike any that we have all known thus far, because there's
absolutely.
healing and recovery that we're all trying to do. Um,
Yeah,
and a lot, like I said, there's a lot of layers to this, and there's
yes.
we could talk about this for years probably.
I know. It's pretty sad, and we've got a long way to go. We really do. Unfortunately, like I'm I feel grateful that I'm already in, doing my work and doing what I need to do, and I realize and understand the reality of my personal situation. It's just there's a lot of people out there that they have no idea. They don't know, and it's going to take them years just to get a grasp on it before they even start that process. And there's going to be a lot of people who unfortunately just won't be able to handle it. It's going to be too much. And that's really sad.
Actually, also, if I can say this before you close out,
Sure.
change this thinking in our heads that, I hear people saying, as far as our nation goes, even, we cannot heal without accountability. We cannot, and I think we can do both.
Yeah.
I think we can heal, and I think we need accountability as well.
Yeah.
But, I hear people saying, well, I am not going to ever support or help this person because they're part of this party, and, they're blah, 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 blah. And it's just like, this is just more trauma. This is just a
Yeah.
mindset to continue to feed those cycles. And that point, that pivot there is hard. It's like trying to help someone you love who is struggling with an addiction to see that they are out of control. Their brain is not
Yeah.
space to be able to grasp and to help them understand. Um,
Exactly.
and all we can do is turn inward in ourselves and say, well, what can I do to work on myself, and let them know that I'm here to support them when they are ready.
Yeah.
And because otherwise we just run back into that innate, like, well, wanting to fix, and that's not the kind of mindset that's going to help us heal, because only we know what we really need individually.
Exactly. Yeah. Yeah. And I think one major factor that will be helpful is people need to get away from the negative. The first thought that ever comes to mind when it comes to somebody's mental health is that negative thought, that negative feeling of, boy, that person's crazy, or wow, that person's got issues. They need to get help. Like that doesn't help
No,
anybody. All that does is just
we're not
further. Exactly. The one thing that would be helpful is for them to, whether it's to donate to a mental health support group, or even to reach out and something positive. That's the start, and more and more people need to do that.
And I think that the more that we start sharing with people the different ways that they can show support, whether it's joining a crisis line, a training for a crisis line, or whether it's helping a domestic abuse shelter, whether it's working at a mission, whether it's, that sacrifice. It does take some time and effort on our part, but it's just like anything. The more teamwork, the better. And so that's what we have to, I think, keep working at, letting people know how they can help, and just keep getting, information and resources out there so that people know that there is a place to turn. And, we've got to keep working on those safe spaces also. And it's, I hear a lot of people saying, oh God, she needs her safe space. And, like you said, that's just more verbal bullshit that we have to say, obviously this person isn't grasping this. So
Yeah.
it's all good.
Well,
People need that. And when kids that, are still at home, not in safe spaces, they need that. So we're going to get rid of that mentality.
absolutely. I think we've got a ways to go, but I think there are signs of it happening. It's just are many steps ahead that need to be taken for this to get there. All right.
Yeah. Thank you.
Absolutely. Well, everybody, that's the end of this episode. And this was amazing. I really enjoyed this. This was definitely a different area than what I typically would talk about, but this was really important, I feel, and I'm glad that we were able to get this out and that we were able to discuss it to the extent that we did. I think this is extremely important.
Absolutely. I felt honored that you contacted me, and I appreciate it. So
Yeah, no problem.
and we'll keep working on this stuff.
You bet. Absolutely. All right, everyone. That's it. I hope you found this very informative and extremely helpful. That's it for the episode. All right. Thanks, everybody, for listening. Bye for now. Thanks, Annette.
Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye, everybody.